Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday after Easter. We're in April 2022, so that's the time we just had it here, at least in our Ananda community. We had just a marvelous Easter celebration, so we're all sort of riding on the bliss of that time when the veil of delusion gets thinner and the powers of the Master is stronger, and the spirit of family is very deep as well, spiritual family. So, with that spirit, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramahansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to all. Dear friend Swami Kriyananda, help us to feel the power of your consciousness behind the words that you've written, that we may feel not only the meaning with our minds, but also receive it in our hearts and transmit the vibrations, the uplifting vibrations, into our souls, that we may live in an ever more free and elevated way, in harmony with the will of God within us. Om, peace. Amen. Today is Monday, Money Monday, and ever since I realized I needed financial support for the work I've been doing, I've been reminding you on Mondays that you can do that if you feel so inclined. PayPal now has Mission of the Masters, which is what we call this. Mission of the Masters is a recognized charity you can set up through PayPal. You can also, I believe you can donate through Zelle to Mission of the Masters. I have to confirm that I have that registered properly. And Patreon is this marvelous website where creative people put forward what they want to do, and people with resources can help them. Everything that you donate goes into a nonprofit religious corporation, which is what Mission of the Masters is. You can get tax credit for it. You'll get a formal receipt, and all of it will be used, is being used, and will be used in one way or another to move forward the work of the Masters. We're doing some audiobooks of Swami Kriyananda's writings. We've published the Spanish and the Italian edition of the book I wrote, Lightbearer. We were able to do a new index for Lightbearer. The first one was very professionally done, but too professionally done. You couldn't really use it to find anything. It's going to be a little while before that index makes it into print, but at least it's ready. Probably I'm going to be traveling around a bit. If not, I have a few trips planned for this year. Certainly by next year I'll really be on the road. So we'll see. And if you're inspired by what we're doing, we're very grateful for your help. Okay. So now I got the one that you all might recognize. We're using the book Affirmations for Self-Healing, but I'm not actually teaching affirmations even though we're mentioning them. The real thing is there are 52 qualities in this book, which I'm calling now a roadmap for right living. And Swami has written a few paragraphs about each quality. And for decades now, these have been read sequentially, week by week. There's 52 of them. But the focus has been on doing the affirmation, and I have so wanted for so long to stop and talk about the qualities themselves. So now I'm indulging my preference, and we are on quality number 2. First quality was success. Number 2 is love. It's also interesting just to see how the sequence, because Swami just made it up. What did he think? Especially thinking it's around and around. You go through every year, which many of us have been doing. Year starts with success, then we come to love. Right after success comes love. So, 3 paragraphs, we've dealt with one of them. 1 finds love, not by being loved, but by loving. That's been stated many times before, not only by Swami. Jesus said it is more blessed to give than to receive. And what he meant by blessed was blissful. More joy comes from giving than receiving. And we almost believe it. So I spent the last session that we were in just trying to make sense out of that, bring it into our actual experience. So paragraph number 2 here. We can never know love if we try to draw others to ourselves, nor can we find it by centering our love in them. For love is infinite, it is never ours to create. We can only channel it from its source in infinity to all whom we meet. This question of, I'll start at the beginning, we can never know love if we try to draw others to ourselves. We live, the beginning place where many adults think about love starts with romantic love. We're trying to find someone to whom we're attracted. We have this idea in our mind of finding some intimate friendship. Let's put the question of sexuality aside for the moment, but just an intimate friendship, somebody who really will care about us and we care about them. Now you posit this against the yogic tradition, of course, of which I am an integral part, of renunciation. And you posit this against the classical idea of monasticism in one form or another, which has permeated all religious traditions. And because we can scorn these renunciate and monastic ideals as being old-fashioned or not in tune with the times, or however we want to say it, but that's naive, because the ultimate transcendence that we're looking for just makes the things of this world, you don't actually have to renounce them in the sense that you don't have to grit your teeth and give up something that you desperately want. It just occurs to you that because of actual life experience and because of elevated perception, that the obvious first human instinct about how to make ourselves happy is not the last word in how to make ourselves happy. And whether that renunciation actually looks like a Himalayan cave, a stone cell, a solitary life in the wilderness, or whether it looks like Lahiri Mahashaya, one of the masters on this path, who was a householder with children, and he had a job and a wife and a home, and yet within himself it was all the role assigned to him by God, and there was no compelling inner need to have that experience. All his only inner need was to do what God asked him to do with complete surrender and joy. Yogananda described Lahiri Mahashaya as a kitten in the mouth of Divine Mother. I actually, as they show on the internet, I saw a video of a mother cat carrying her kittens around, and I haven't been near a cat with kittens for decades in my life, so it was really something, because the kittens are completely, they have no capacity to influence the situation. The mother just picks them up and just drags them someplace and drops them off. So for Master to describe another avatar who was Lahiri Mahashaya as being that surrendered, I mean, that's wholly different than I need, I want, I have to have. So it isn't only how it looks from the outside, it's entirely what it is from the inside. But still, we have this compelling longing. And it's very interesting. The last book that Swami Kriyananda wrote before he left this planet in 2013, on April 21st, which is just a few days from now is the anniversary of that, the last book he wrote was a book that was called Love Perfected, Life Divine. And it was a bit of a surprising book, especially for the closure of that long incarnation, because what he did is he took a novel that had been published 100 years earlier, and the novel was called Life Everlasting. And it was written by a woman who was extremely popular in her day, but in the fickle nature of the world has now been largely forgotten. Her name was Marie Corelli. I believe she was British, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, I think she was British, Marie Corelli. And she wrote quite a few novels, and they all had spiritual themes. And she was enlightened to a degree. She had a very interesting perspective. She had a highly expanded perspective, but she didn't have as much clarity about the spiritual life as Swami Kriyananda brought to it. But nonetheless, the novel, The Life Everlasting, Swamiji read it, and many of us in the community read it. It was even said that Paramahansa Yogananda read it. It was described as the only novel that he actually read the whole book, because it was very interesting, and the theme is soulmates. Soulmates in the most romantic way that you can imagine soulmates. Marie Corelli's heroines were always women. She was an early advocate of women's rights and women's freedom, and to a large extent the superiority of women, although she wasn't really that crazed on that point, but nonetheless she was very strong. So all her heroines were women, and they were always unusual and remarkable. Why not? It's your book. You can write it the way you want it. And this story was about a man and a woman and it was the journey of many, many, many incarnations in which they were divinely destined as soulmates to be two halves of one reality. And they were always trying to fulfill in a human way what that divine potential was. So the story is they meet again in this particular lifetime, which was current times, her current times. And he has now become, he's undertaken a more serious spiritual training and now has a greater capacity for perfect love. And she teeters right on the edge of being where he is, but she still needs to she needs to literally go to this master and go through this training and face and overcome certain tests before they will be a match. And part of the story, and it's not like they give it to you in detail, but is all the previous incarnations and all the ways in which that perfect love was destroyed by selfishness. You know, selfishness or fear from one side or the other. One side meaning he or she. Until finally, in the drama, he figures out that until he perfects himself, he will never really be able to have this perfect relationship with her. And so he meets her again in the hope that he can persuade her to go do this. It's a marvelous story. Even the way Marie Corelli wrote it, it's a really great story. But Swamiji was always a little dissatisfied with it because he felt that Corelli just simply didn't understand divine law sufficiently to lift that story to the level where it should be. For example, the story ends with the two of them. This man has unlimited wealth because he's learned to operate the laws of the universe. So he has this magnificent yacht. So they get on this yacht and they sail away, and they're going to sail away and just ride the yacht forever, presumably. Swami has always been both very, I sort of want to use the word romantic in the sense that he's a poet and he's a singer and a songwriter. He has a very great, refined sense of beauty and elegance and all of those things. But he's not sentimental. So he often says things that are just a little shocking, like he said. For any two people to be all in all to one another, he said they would have to be exceptionally stupid because it's just one person isn't sufficient. You know, we have a multi-dimensional nature. So the idea that you could really just be happy just on this yacht with just this one guy forever and ever, he says it's just a very narrow concept of human life. To whom would you give? How would you be serving? How would you be expanding your consciousness? You can't just sort of spin in I love you, you love me. It has to go somewhere else. And that was among the limitations Swami felt. So he rewrote the story. He used a lot of her plot and a lot of her words even She liked her own words, so there were perhaps too many of them. I loved once a review of a certain book said the main problem with this book is there's too many pages between the front and back cover. So Marie Curley was a little like that. Sometimes there were a few too many words. She became enamored of her own language. But who am I to criticize? I've never written a novel. She wrote many. She was wildly successful. So I'm just talking about it. But Swami skinnied down her prose a little and lifted up her philosophy. Now, here we are. I'm saying this is the last book he wrote. He thought this subject of human love and the desire of opposites to come together in what we know could be this profoundly transcendent union. He thought it was a worthy subject for him to put his own energy and his thought into. And even in a romantic way, in the romantic story. Now, let me pull these thoughts together. Give me a moment. Master himself, Yogananda himself, acknowledged that soulmates is a reality. But he only spoke about it, wrote about it in one place. He never referred to it. He gave lectures and talks on how to attract the right spiritual mate, how to have a spiritual marriage. Master was very practical, and he took the teachings down into a very practical way. And he definitely talks about soul friendship and soul union and so on like that. But the real specific concept of there is a destined other that we must meet, Master spoke of it, and he said it's true. And he said before we can be spiritually liberated and freed, you have to reunite with your soulmate. Now here's where Master completely diverged from the way everyone else says it, which is because we think of soulmates as romantic, and romantic involves sexuality, involves physical attraction, and all of that. We think of it in those terms. But the nature of the kind of soul union that Master was speaking of, by definition, must transcend all physical imperatives. We think that sexuality is the apex of romantic union, but once one's experience becomes elevated, it's not necessarily that sexuality ceases to be important or relevant. There's nothing sinful about it. It's just the way we're made. But physical passion can disrupt the power and the clarity of the love we have for each other more than it can ensure it, because it's fundamentally selfish. It fundamentally requires you to be a certain way for me to be happy. And when we're really talking about true transcendence, you can't have both. But it's not like you rip it off of yourself and long for it forever. It just ceases to be as meaningful to you because it has been replaced with something that's more meaningful. And it's progressive. You don't have to break yourself into pieces trying to live this way. You just do what you can to raise your consciousness, and it all evolves in its own natural, beautiful time, or just as it's meant to. So when Master talked about soulmates, it was not even necessarily complementary gender related at all. Swami speculated that Master's soulmate was actually Sri Yukteswar, because Master's actual guru was Babaji. Babaji sent Master to Sri Yukteswar for training. But Babaji was Master's actual guru. When Master was Arjuna and Babaji was Krishna, you go back to that. But there was a unity of spirit, and Master and Sri Yukteswar were complementary opposites in many ways. And Swami never was able to say definitively that was true. But Master said this union between soulmates he said it doesn't even have to be in the physical world. He said your soulmate might be on another planet, and the unity that you would have with that soul, that half soul, could be envisioned as your movement toward divine freedom. Everything in this universe is dual, that's how Swami said. So and even traditionally you have men and women, you have the male and the female, you have the yin and the yang, which is a better way to think about it, because you can have yin and yang regardless of the gender of the body. If you think of Sri Yukteswar and Master, you could sort of see the yin and the yang as that Chinese symbol of two equal halves making a circle, curved halves making a circle. So you always have to have that balance one way or another. Ultimately, the union of the yin and the yang in an external relationship is because it allows us to complete that yin-yang balance within ourselves, because each of us is also complete in ourselves but when we finally come to that realization. Now, the part that I was coming to in all of this, because I don't think we can talk about love without talking about romantic love. And here Swami's saying, don't try to draw people to yourself and don't center your love in them. And I haven't even really tried to explain that yet. If I don't get to it today, I'll do it tomorrow. But when Swami was writing that book, let's see now, he ended up asking me to write the introduction to it. So in it, I'd had this conversation, I'm just trying to think. The conversation I had with Swami was before he wrote the book, long before it. And it's a subject that had always interested Swami, and he talked about it from time to time, because he had a wide-ranging interest. And he was a romantic. Romantic love in its highest form was a vibration that Swamiji contemplated. I'm saying it in this way. I want you to understand it in the right way. It's more that everyone, like Sri Yukteswar was an astrologer. He wasn't a poet in the same way that Swami was a poet. Swami also studied astrology, but he wrote poetry, whereas Sri Yukteswar didn't necessarily. Maybe he wrote some, but he was a gyan. He just thought about things in a different way. And Swamiji, because he was a troubadour and a poet, songs have that, music just has that swelling feeling, that longing that comes out of us. I was very interested when I lived at Ananda Village for the first 16 years, especially the first 10 or 12. We were very, very isolated there. This was before computers and even before videos. It was just and we didn't even have electricity. I had a battery-operated tape recorder. So it was like we just didn't interact with the world. So a great deal of popular culture I say, thank you, God, I just completely lived outside of it. We weren't completely ignorant. We didn't hide from the world, but we didn't invite it in. So a lot of things, we didn't have televisions, so we just didn't see a lot. And at one point when I started traveling and teaching in the early 80s, I knew about Barbra Streisand. I'd heard her sing, but I didn't know much about her. The movie Yentl had just come out. And I was somewhere, and someone wanted to take us to the movie, so we went to see it. I said, I didn't live in an Amish community. I wasn't hidden like that. But I'd never seen the movie. It was showing in the theater. It was a really good movie. And Barbra Streisand, brilliant singer. And it's a movie set in the Jewish culture, so it was familiar to me. And it was about this woman it was probably in the 1800s, probably about in the 1800s. And there was this woman in some Eastern European small village, and she was very intellectual and a very intelligent woman, but women weren't allowed to study, only men were allowed to study. And somehow or another, she managed, and I don't remember the details, to disguise herself as a man, and she began to be able to study, which made her tremendously happy. And she became so good that she was going to become a rabbi, or did become a rabbi. A woman dressed as a man, and then I think the Yentl was the matchmaker. Then they got her a bride, and she sort of, it was just like one thing just fell upon another. It wasn't a drama. It was a I guess it was both funny and dramatic, but it wasn't a tragedy. And just this whole thing plays itself out. Now, the end of all of this is it's a Jewish story, which the Jewish music is wonderfully emotional, just wonderfully emotional. Think Fiddler on the Roof. And the story was all about human love. And she sang magnificently, these melodies and so on like that. And what I felt in the music, it was really interesting. It really stirred the heart. It just captured you like this. And it just pulled on your heartstrings, and your energy was just drawn into this incredible story. And then what would happen is the song would end. And it would be like I would be just all stirred up and drawn out. And then the song would end, and basically all that energy would just go splat onto the sidewalk. There was nothing to do with it, because the movie was all about human longing and unfulfilled human longing, and there was no resolution of that. It was just the endless story of endless human longing that never quite works out. Now, in this case, it dramatically didn't work out, because this woman gets a woman as a bride, and in that time, that was not an option, just a hide that she's not even actually a man. You can see. It was complicated, let's just put it that way. But they stirred you up, got you to this wonderful point, and Barbra Streisand was terrific at getting you to that point. Splat to the sidewalk. And by contrast, I realized that the music that Swami wrote, which I knew, but I'd never had it so dramatic, because I didn't listen to other music, was that Swami's music totally stirs the heart, just awakens this profound longing. But the melodies rise and rise and rise, and sort of take you inwardly up toward a transcendent level. And that longing is required, because without love, we're not hungry. You see, love is hunger. If we're not hungry, we don't put out any energy to progress in any field. If we just don't care. I mean, I've talked to people about the spiritual path that I'm on and had intelligent conversations with them, and they can be interested in theory, but they're not hungry. They're not hungry for deeper meaning. They're not hungry to transcend this up and down, endless up and down of fulfillment and disappointment, which is human life. And by opposite, I was hungry from the day I was born. I mean, almost literally. I was just always looking for something that nobody was feeding me. That's why I went to college for a year, but I was actually interested for 2 weeks, because it took me 2 weeks to find out that they were highly intelligent, but they weren't wise. And there I was, I'd sort of held out to get to university, thinking somebody would tell me something I wanted to know. By the grace of God, 9 months later, somebody gave me the book about Sri Ramakrishna, and that was it. I was settled after that. Somebody was actually wise. But in all of this, back to where I was, this conversation with Swami. So Swami always had this interest, and because Master confirmed it, Swami, because he was a teacher too, he was always reflecting on what did he mean, what can I say? But Swami said this. He said, everyone longs to be loved. He said, not just impersonally by God, but personally by one other human being. And he said God would not plant that desire in the human heart unless he intended also to fulfill it. Isn't that interesting? Now, of course, we have to understand, we have to grow to understand what that fulfillment actually looks like. But that we should feel that way, and that the promise will be fulfilled, Swamiji said it must be true. All right. We'll continue tomorrow. God bless you.